amounts not deductible under section 40 AI, interest, royalty, etc. Now what happens is that in many cases, a person who's a resident in India, okay, let's say this portion represents India, okay, the red box. He makes a payment to a person who is outside India, okay, or maybe there's a person in India who is a non-resident, right? The person is situated outside India, or in India he is a non-resident, and there are certain payments made by this person to either this person or this person. Then if these payments are in a nature which is given in this particular section, this person is under an obligation to withhold tax, right? And after withholding, he has to deposit it with the government. Deposit with government, right? If he does not withhold the tax, or after withholding does not pay it with the government, then this person is not allowed a deduction. We saw earlier that, in order to compute your income under the head profits and gains of business and profession, you take the income and then you reduce expenses, right? If this person does not withhold tax on these payments, or after withholding tax he does not deposit the tax so withheld with the government, he is not allowed a deduction in computing his taxable income, right? This is the logic which is there in this particular section. Now let us see how does this fare vis-a-vis the exact section. Interest, royalty, fee for technical services or other sum. So the payment that I spoke that this person is making could be either of these four. Which four? Either it could be interest, either it could be royalty, it could be fee for technical services or other sum, right? So the nature of payment is either of these four, right? Chargeable under the Income Tax Act. This payment should be chargeable under the Income Tax Act in the hands of the non-resident. So the person who's receiving this payment, who's outside India or in India, the payment that he is making should be chargeable. If he is exempt from tax on such income, then this section is not applicable, right? Let's say the payment is covered in these nature and it's also chargeable under the Income Tax Act. Then the recipient should be whom? Paid, payable, outside India to any person, in India to a non-resident, on which tax is deductible at source. So I told you that there should be some withholding which is applicable. And once the payment is covered as either of these four, it's chargeable, it's made to a specified person, the tax is deductible, but what happens is such tax has not been deducted, the payer does not deduct a tax. Or after deduction, such tax has not been paid during the previous year or in the subsequent year before the expiry of time prescribed under section 201, subsection 1 of 200, right? It's not section 201, it is subsection 1 of 200. Now there are time limits which are prescribed within which you have to deposit the tax with the government, okay? And it varies depending on the date when you have deducted the tax. These time limits are given in section 1, subsection 1 of section 200, right? We will see these details when we discuss about the chapter of TDS. So the fact is, you either do not deduct tax or after deducting you do not deposit it with the government within this prescribed times, then the consequence is you will not be allowed a deduction for this expenditure. But what happens if I subsequently deduct tax and pay it with the government, right? But after the prescribed time, after this time which is mentioned in 200 subsection 1. So 201, as I told you, prescribes dates within which you have to deposit the tax with the government. Normally it is 7 days from the end of the month in which you deduct tax. So let's say for March there is a defined timeline which falls after the financial year, right? As long as you deposit it within that time frame, you get a deduction during the last financial year. If you don't get a deduction. But if subsequently you deduct and pay, then such sum shall be allowed as a deduction in computing the income of the previous year in which such tax has been paid. So let's say financial year 11-12, right? You withhold tax or you make a payment of 100,000. Withholding tax, let's say on this is 10,000. First thing is you do not deduct. If you don't deduct, no tax deduction. Second is you deduct, but you do not deposit within 201 timeline, right? Again, there is no deduction. Third is you deposit stroke deduct in subsequent years. Then you are allowed a deduction in the year in which you deduct and deposit. So if it happens in financial year 12-13, right, after the specified date, right, then you are allowed a deduction in 12 and 13. Let us now see how do we withhold taxes on certain payments which are made to residents.